So in this video, I'm going to take you through some text by Alexander Pope, in particular his poem called An Essay on Man. First, let me say a few words just to introduce Alexander Pope. You can see a few pictures of him here on the uh, on the screen. Let me pause this. So there he is, circa 1716. Notice 1716, this is quite a bit later than what we were just looking at with Giordano Bruno. Bruno was executed in 1600. Alexander Pope was not born until 1688, 88 years later. So he belongs a couple of generations after Giordano Bruno, and of course, quite a bit, right? Several generations after Nicholas Copernicus. So the reason he is here in the introduction is not because of when he was born in particular. He's not at the beginning of the period that we're reading in this course. Rather, we look at his text to see what kind of thinking started coming about as a result of Copernicus's thought and how it developed into a quite extensive program of what is called Enlightenment thought in the period. Pope is, of course, a poet. He was not a pope. He's in no way related to the church in this way. Some students sometimes make that mistake. Just happens to be his name as Alexander Pope. He was a famous poet. He was famous in particular for a form of poetry that is rhymes very frequently at the ends of you'll see at the ends of the sentences, and contains these things called heroic couplets. Not too much for us is important about the life of Alexander Pope, except to say that he did discuss very often with philosophers living at the time, in particular this fellow called Lord Bolingbroke, who the poem is dedicated to. He discussed with him the universe, the place of man within the universe, and essentially the way you can see Alexander Pope is that he is writing a poem which is to express the attitudes, feelings, and ideas that a vision of the universe similar to Giordano Bruno's generates within his own mind, and trying to communicate the kind of lessons that Bruno's vision of the universe should teach us about our own arrogance, our own inability to think outside the confines of our own narrow existence, and to place us within our proper sphere in creation. So this is what Pope's poem is all about. One of the key ideas that emerges out of, we already saw it in Bruno a little bit, was this idea, in fact, two ideas. One is that the universe is kind of this infinite system of worlds and worlds where we don't really understand, we cannot comprehend the whole matter ourselves. So one of the great enemies of Bruno was narrow-mindedness. The vision of the universe that he develops after Copernicus, if it does nothing else, it's supposed to give us a sense of our own inadequacy to comprehend the greatness, extent of creation, and to make us respectful of those things we do not comprehend and that are outside of us. So that is one of the deep lessons, and you'll see that's present in Pope's poem as well. That's why, in particular, it's called the Essay on Man, we'll say. So let's bring the text over. Here we go. Here's yet another picture of Alexander Pope. So his poem was published in 4 parts. We only give you 3 parts in the reader here. It is entitled An Essay on Man. Extending this idea of Bruno, that we should deeply think about how limited our understanding of the world is, and we should cultivate our own place in the world instead of seeking to exploit those things outside of us. That general idea can be seen as saying that The universe is so enormous, so great, God's design is so great that we cannot understand its true purpose. And so what we should focus on is on ourselves and on what we can comprehend. And that in conjunction with a kind of respect for what we cannot know, we should focus on the things that we can know and that are our own business. So don't busy yourself with others. Focus on what is your own true vocation in the universe. And don't estimate yourself to be greater than you are, nor lower than you are. Try to find your proper place in the order of things. This is the lesson. And so the essay on man, it focuses on man, and as he says, it tries to determine the true nature of man and his true station, his true place in the design of the whole. Now the poem begins, it's dedicated, I said, to this fellow Lord Bolingbroke, who was a friend of his and was a philosopher with whom he discussed many of these ideas, many of them drawn from Bruno and others, that are the basis of and form the basis of this poem. So this is a very philosophical poem. It's a poem that is supposed to put some philosophical ideas into memorable prose for us. So let's read the first part here. He calls it the design. Remember, there's this very nice idea in texts of the period. You'll remember that Copernicus said that he would order the parts of his treatise on the revolutions of the heavenly spheres after the order that is present in the universe itself, which is also parallels this idea that by studying the universe, we become like the universe. So we become ordered like the universe. The book on the universe should be ordered like the universe. There is a design and a system in the universe, and so the things that discuss and understand and comprehend that design should themselves share in that order, harmony, design, perfection, and so on. They should be ordered. So in a way that makes sense here. He's going to describe the plan of the whole poem, and the poem itself has an order and design that reflects the order and design of the universe. So the design. So he says, having proposed to write some pieces of human life and manners, come home to men's business and bosoms, I thought it more satisfactory to begin with considering man in the abstract, his nature and his state. Now, by state here, he doesn't mean his political state. He means the state he is in nature. So his position, his condition. Since, to prove any moral duty, to enforce any moral precept, or to examine the perfection or imperfection of any creature whatsoever, it is necessary first to know what condition and relation it is placed in, and what is the proper end and purpose of its being. So he's saying, if we want to understand any being whatsoever, and therefore also man, we should know his true condition and relation that he's placed in. That is his place in the universe. And what is his proper end? What is the purpose of this being, right? Once we know the purpose for which human beings were created and human beings' place in creation, then we can judge whether the human being is good or bad and fulfills that position well or not, right? He calls this a science of human nature, right? It's a science. Science actually goes back to Latin scientia, which just means knowledge, a kind of knowledge of human nature. Like other sciences, reduces to a few clear points. There are not many certain truths in the world. So like Bruno said, or indicated, we don't know many things in the universe for certain, right? It is therefore in the anatomy of the mind, as in that of the body, more goodwill to accrue to mankind by attaining to the large and open and perceptible parts than by studying such finer nerves and vessels, the conformations and uses of which will ever escape our observation. So all he's saying there is that whenever one is studying a subject, it's easiest to start with the large parts. Like, for instance, when we study the universe, we study the motions of the planets. We don't first start with understanding plate tectonics and everything on all the planets and then build up, from there. We start with simple things like orbiting planets around the sun and try to study those. And so when we turn to man, we shouldn't start with the most minute things in man and try to understand them. We should try to understand man in the general, in the abstract, as he says, as a whole, the most important aspects of man. And that's what he's going to discuss in each part of this poem. Let's skip a little further down. He explains why he did this in a poetry. We don't need to read through that. You can read through that yourself. Now he says, what is now published is only to be considered a general map of man. Again, emphasizing that his poem has this general feature. It looks at the larger parts of man and describes them, marking out no more than the greater parts, their extent and their limits, and their connection, and leaving the particular to be more fully delineated in the charts which are to follow. Right? He proposed there would be further poems after this that would go into particular areas. Now we turn to the first epistle. So this is an epistle is a letter. So although this is a poem, it's written as if it were a series of letters in the form of poems. So it's not just dedicated to Lord Bolingbroke. It is written to Lord Bolingbroke, and this first poem is, as it were, the first letter, right, of the four. The argument, this might look a little unusual, but it's a very common language of the period. When you're going to summarize something, you call that the argument of it. So this is not really the argument in the sense that you and I use the term today. It's more of a summary or of what's to come. So this announces, what is the first epistle about? It's about the nature and the state of man. Again, not the political state of man, but the condition of man in nature with respect to the universe, right? So what is man's relationship to the universe? And now all of these little, this I refers to the first part of the poem, right? I, you see, after first introduction, there's an I. The I too refers then to the next one. So very handily here, in the argument, he's given us a line-by-line summary of what the poem is stating. And you want to read this carefully. It may seem like something you'd skip over if you're going to read the poem. But actually, there's stuff in here that is much clearer, and often there is stuff here that you will not understand later in the poem if you just read it directly. So the argument and the poem fit together into one package that it's easier to understand together. This is because he didn't really want to repeat all this. He expects you to read it. So the first one is of man in the abstract. He says, that we can judge only with regard to our own system, being ignorant of the relations of systems and things. Same idea I was speaking about earlier, that we should judge only what is closest to us and that we can know. We should not pry into all those things that are beyond us. And of course, Bruno's vision of the universe shows us that there are infinitely many things that are beyond us that we cannot comprehend, right? 2, that man is not deemed imperfect, but a being suited to his place and rank in the creation, agreeable to the order of things and conformable to ends and relations unknown to him. So although we are supposed to study the things that are closest to us, still what he indicates here is quite interesting, right? We do not even know the purposes for which we are created. So even though certain things we can know better than others, the ultimate purpose of human beings in the universe are ultimately what we should be is unknown to us. It may always be unknown to us. The universe is so infinite, we are so interconnected with all things in the great system of the universe, Pope thinks, that creation of God has purposes beyond our comprehension. And since we relate to everything else in the universe, we serve purposes beyond our comprehension. So we don't even know what we are for, right? But nevertheless, he says, man is not to be considered imperfect. So just because we are, Bruno has the similar idea, right? We should deem ourselves perfect in our own way, in our own place. Pope is saying similarly here, we shouldn't think that man is imperfect because he doesn't encompass all perfections. Rather, we should think that man is perfect if he is perfectly what he is supposed to be, given his particular place in creation. So Pope's idea that each thing needs to be measured by its relation to other things and its proper place. So just as a policeman who wants to be king of the world is imperfect because he wants to be out of his place. He doesn't want to serve his function the best that he can. There can be a police that is a perfect policeman. He knows exactly what his duties are. He doesn't overstep his duties. He doesn't presume to do more than he can. Right? This is the idea. Man should fulfill his proper function and not try to be more or less than what he truly is. Right? 3, that it is partly upon his ignorance of future events and partly upon the hope of a future state, condition, that all his happiness in the present depends. So this is another idea that the Pope, this goes beyond anything we found in Bruno, which is the idea that not only is man perfect in his state, but that our happiness depends upon our, what seem to be our imperfections, our ignorance of things. Ignorance and hope. We can only be hopeful because we're ignorant, right? We can only hope for certain things because we don't know what's going to happen. And it's because we don't know that what's going to happen, partially, that we can be happy. If you knew, and this is one of the things he talks about in the poem, if you knew when you were going to die, and you had vividly before your mind your own death and the decay of your own body and the end of all the things that you love and cherish, and they're being swept away by the history of time, if you knew all that stuff immediately and it was present in your mind, you could never be happy. You can only have the happiness that you have in part because of your imperfections and your ignorance. 4, now here we see pride, right? Remember, in Bruno, his enemy was pride as well. The pride of man, arrogance. Here, the pride of aiming at more knowledge and pretending to more perfection, the cause of man's error and misery. So man causes his own error and misery by trying to be more than he is, right? The impiety of putting himself in the place of God and judging the fitness or unfitness, perfection or imperfection, justice or injustice of his, that is God's, dispensations or decrees or decisions or whatever. So man's misery, his happiness comes from his ignorance, and his misery comes from his pretending to be more perfect than he is, and his aiming at more knowledge than he should have, and impiety at putting himself in the place of God. What does that mean? Well, he's saying when man stands back and looks at the universe and says, this could be better, man could be better, his situation could be better, then he is judging God's creation and putting himself in the place of God, who alone is suited to see all that is in its fitness and unfitness, perfection and imperfection, justice or injustice. So man is not man deciding to judge the nature of creation himself is one of these acts of pretending to more perfection and more knowledge than is appropriate to man. 5, the absurdity of conceiting himself the final cause or purpose of creation. Absurdity of man thinking that he is the purpose of creation, or expecting that perfection in the moral world which is not in the natural. Right? So expecting human beings to be better than they are, and expecting humanity itself to be the purpose for which the enormous infinite creation was brought about. Of course, Bruno's vision, so this is completely consonant with Bruno's ideas, right? Once you see an infinite universe, we are no longer we're not even the center, we're nowhere near the center. We are our own center, and everything else can be its own center. There are perhaps living beings on all planets in the universe. Once you conceive that idea, it is truly absurd then to think that all of that was created for man alone, right? For humanity, for mankind. That we are the final goal reason for creation. 6, the unreasonableness of man's complaints against providence. While on the one hand he demands the perfections of the angels, and the other the bodily qualifications of the brutes. Though to possess any of the sensitive faculties in a higher degree would render him miserable. Again, our actual body and the fineness of our senses and so on are suited to our state. And so Bruno thinks it's obvious that if we were to change our bodies, if we were to become able to see things that were smaller or larger or any of these things, it would make us miserable. And yet we want to be like angels in one respect, and in another respect we want to have the powerful bodies of brutes, right? We want to be everything but what we actually are. But if we were those things, we would not be happy, all right? And it's unreasonable to complain that we are not angels against providence, because providence is the all-knowing vision of things from the point of view of God, whereas we know almost zero, almost a vanishing quantity of what there is in the universe. So how could we judge, right? 7, that throughout the whole visible universe, a universal order and gradation in the sensual and mental faculties is observed, which cause is the subordination of creature to creature and of all creatures to man. So throughout the visible universe, everything is related to everything else, and there's a gradual degree of change and linkage between everything. There are beings that are, even if you look among human beings, there are people who are extremely intelligent and people who are extremely stupid, and there are people in every degree in between. And this is how he sees the whole universe. It's one continuous gradation of perfections. Man is at some place in all those things, and even within man, there are many degrees of sensual. What he means here is not sexual or anything like that. He means sensual, having to do with our physical senses, our sensual faculties, our abilities to sense, and our mental faculties, right? Faculties of mind. There is a gradation, a matter of degrees in all human beings. The gradations of sense, instinct, thought, reflection, and reason, so he talks about those, that reason alone countervails all the other faculties. So we'll see reason has a very special role to play in controlling us and helping us to control ourselves. That's something very particular to human beings. Right? 8, how much further this order and subordination of living creatures may extend above and below us, were any part of which broken, not that part only, but the whole connected creation must be destroyed. So he has this idea that not only is everything interconnected in the universe, and everything is filled and plentiful in all these many degrees, but God created the entire creation in this way to create all things in all degrees. And so in a certain sense, everything is interdependent. Everything serves everything else. And if one thing were removed from the universe, the rest would fall into disorder and be destroyed. Notice this is not unrelated to Copernicus's very much smaller idea, but very similar, that if any of the planets were to move slightly differently, the system of the universe, of his solar system, would be disordered and would fall apart and be destroyed. Right? The extravagance and madness and pride of such a desire to be more than we are, and the consequence of all the absolute submission due to providence. So this point has a further point, which he's drawing out here, which is above he talked about the pride that leads human beings to want to be more than they are, right? To break free from their place in creation. And now he's saying because everything depends on everything else, and every link in that chain of creation must be there or the whole chain breaks, man essentially wants to destroy creation in order to be better than he is. Right? That's arrogance. Right? Again, arrogance, another opponent of Bruno. Extravagance, madness, pride of such a desire. The consequence of all the absolute submission due to providence, both as to our present and future state, to the end. So let's read a little bit through the first epistle. That we just went through all the ideas in the first epistle, right? Awake, my St. John. So it's written to St. John, John Bolingbroke. Leave all meaner things to low ambition and the pride of kings. Let us, since life can little more supply than just look about us and to die, expatiate, speak, freely, free, or all this scene of man, a mighty maze, but not without a plan, so it's systematic, a wild where weeds and flowers promiscuous shoot, of garden tempting with forbidden fruit. Let's skip a little bit. I nature's walks shoot folly as it flies, and catch the manners living as they rise. Laugh where we can, be candid. Laugh where we must, be candid where we can, but vindicate the ways of God to man. So vindicate the ways of God to man. This is a very famous line in the poem. Essentially, the poem explains why, although we look at the universe and we look at human society and we look at the earth and we look at all things and we see all kinds of very bad things around us, evil people, natural disasters, nevertheless, God, if you believe in a God like Bruno did, all things are perfect. All things are created according to a plan devised by God himself. And so those moral evils must not be real. They must only be because we don't truly understand them and we judge them from our own partial point of view. And you already saw that earlier. He thinks that many of the things that make man miserable are man's own fault, right? And so in a way, this whole poem is explaining how everything is God's design, and when it appears not to be, that's not due to God, but because of our own arrogance or ignorance, right? And so the poem performs what is in the period was called a theodicy. It shows us that despite appearances, God's creation is perfect, and that the imperfections are in us, not in God. Now notice this is more or less the same kind of a different use of the same idea that Pope had, or that Copernicus had, right? Remember his idea was the universe will look more beautiful and ordered if we understand that the disorders in the universe, the retrograde motions, really stem from us and not from the things that we see. They are merely apparent. Here too, Pope wants to show that evils in nature and in human nature even are apparent. Now, we can't see the true perspective. We can never have the true perspective in which they disappear entirely, right? So we have to submit to the fact that God must have created the best, even if we can't understand that, right? So he's going to vindicate the ways of God to man, justify God's ways. So in the first part, say first of God above or man below, what can we reason but from what we know? Of man, what we see but from his station here, from which to reason or to which refer. So these lines are essentially stating, right, asking, how can we possibly do more than reason from what is closest to us and what we know? We can't comprehend nature from God's point of view. We can only understand man from what we see here around us, right? And we have to refer from that. We have to extend our knowledge from what's around us. Of course, through the worlds unnumbered, though the God be known, 'tis ours to trace him only in our own, right? So he's in this idea of worlds unnumbered, infinite worlds and universes like Bruno. We know the God in all of this, but we cannot know all of this infinity. We can only know what is closest to us. We can only see God through the things around us, as Bruno was talking about. God is closer to us than we are to ourselves. We can only know him within ourselves, right? He, through vast immensity, can see worlds on worlds compose one universe. God can. He can observe how system into system runs, what other planets circle other suns, what varied being peoples every star, sounds very much like Bruno, may tell us why heaven has made us why we are. But of this frame, the bearings and the ties, the strong connections, nice dependencies, gradations just, has thy pervading soul looked through? So although God knows the whole system of the universe, do you? Can you? Can you, as a part of the universe, contain the whole universe within yourself? Obviously, it's a rhetorical question. The answer is no. Is the great chain that draws all to agree and drawn supports upheld by God or thee? So is it God who stands in charge of all things, or you? Presumptuous man, the reason wouldst thou find why formed so weak, so little, and so blind? So, presumptuous, arrogant man, you would want to know the reason. The reason wouldst thou find. You would like to find the reason why you are formed to be such a weak, such a little thing, and so blind. First, if thou canst, the harder reason guess, why form no weaker, no blinder, and no less. Ask of thy mother why the oaks are made taller or stronger than the weeds they shade. So you're going to ask why all these things are made the way they are, including yourself. Of systems possible, if 'tis confessed, that wisdom infinite must form the best. So whatever things look like to you or appear to you, it must be confessed that an infinite wisdom, remember the infinite God in Bruno, must form the best. Where all in the universe must full or not coherent be, and all that rises rise in due degree. This is that degradation, gradation of degree in all creation. Then in the scale of reasoning life, 'tis plain there must be somewhere such a rank as man. So if the universe is full of all things of all kinds, then somewhere in all that infinity of stuff, there must be a being such as man. And all the question is only this, if God has placed him wrong. Respecting man, whatever wrong we call, must be right as relative to all. So whatever appears to you to be wrong when you look at man must be right when seen from the perspective of the universe itself and relative to all other things. In human works, though labored on in pain, 1,000 movements scarce one purpose gain. If you look at the history of humanity, human effort has rarely resulted in anything coming about, and as soon as it comes about, it's usually destroyed. So man has a very hard time laboring on in pain, and 1,000 things he does, scarcely one purpose gains, right? He scarcely achieves one thing. But in God's one single action or work or movement can its end produce, yet serves to second some other use. So when God tries to produce something, it's not only immediately produced, but it has uses beyond itself and perhaps infinite uses. So man who here seems principle alone, perhaps acts second to some sphere unknown, touches some wheel or verges to some goal, 'tis but a part we see and not a whole. So even though man seems to, all of his efforts seem in vain, and he scarce one purpose gains, right? Nevertheless, he's created by God, and so most likely what we do, what man does, probably has infinite repercussions throughout the entire universe and touches all other things, because 'tis but a part we see and not a whole, right? Let's skip a little further down. In this part, these are parts he's talking about how our ignorance is part of what makes us happy. Go wiser thou, and in thy scale of sense weigh thy opinion against providence. So he's saying, if you judge the universe to be imperfect, weigh yourself against providence, against God's foresight. Call imperfection what thou fanciest such, what you think to be such. Say, here he, God, gives too little or there too much, and in doing so, destroy all creatures for thy sport or gust, yet cry, if man's unhappy, God's unjust. If man alone engross not heaven's high care, alone made perfect here, immortal there, snatch from his hand the balance and the rod, rejudge his justice, be the God of God. All right, he's indicting humanity for being too proud, and in that trying to be the God of God. In pride, in reasoning pride, our error lies. All quit their spheres, all leave where they're supposed to be, and rush into the skies. Pride still is aiming at the blessed abodes. Men would be angels, angels would be gods. Aspiring to be gods, if angels fell, aspiring to be angels, men rebel. Right? And who but wishes to invert the laws of order sins against the eternal cause. This 5 here is everything for you or not. Ask for what end the heavenly bodies shine. Earth for whose use? Pride answers, 'tis for mine. For me, kind nature wakes her genial power, suckles each herb and spreads out every flower. Right? So again, he's indicting the pride that would say that all the universe is created for man's use. Let's go a bit further. See through this air, this ocean, and this earth, all matter quick and bursting into birth, above all, how high progressive life may go. Around, how wide, how deep extend below. Vast chain of being, the entire universe, which from God began, nature's eternal, human, angel, man, beast, bird, fish, insect, what no eye can see, no glass can reach, from infinite to thee, from thee to nothing. On superior powers were we to press, inferior might on ours, or in the full creation leave a void where one step broken the great scales destroyed. From nature's chain whatever link you strike, 10th or the 1000th breaks the chain alike. This idea, everything is interconnected. He paints this picture of a scale going from nothing all the way up to God himself, and that this in this infinite chain, if you strike away a 10th or the 10,000th link, then the entire chain breaks. And if each system and gradation roll alike essential to the amazing whole, so every individual thing, no matter how small, is essential to the whole, close to God, as Bruno would say. The least confusion, but in one, not all, that system only, but the whole must fall, right? So if one, again, this is about the idea of the dependency of each thing in the universe on each thing, such that if one were to be removed, all the rest would fall. Let Earth unbalanced from her orbit fly, planets and suns run lawless through the sky. Let ruling angels from their spheres be hurled, being on being wrecked and world on world. Heaven's whole foundations to their center nod, and nature tremble to the throne of God. All this dread order break for whom? For thee, vile worm, O madness, pride, impiety. Right? This is a very nice passage because first, after reiterating this idea of the great chain of being, as it's called, and the dependency of everything on everything else in the universe, this idea also that we found in Copernicus of the planets all fitting into a system where if you moved one, the whole thing would fall apart. Then he actually moves explicitly into a kind of cosmological, astronomical image of all the planets flying lawlessly out of their orbits and the entire world crashing down, all because of the human being's pride. So you can see there very well encapsulated this connection between a sense of our place in the universe as human beings and the physical system of the universe that we understand ourselves to be a part of. All are but parts of one stupendous whole, whose body nature is, and God the soul. All full as perfect in a hair as heart, all full as perfect in vile man that mourns, as the rapt seraph that adorns and burns. To him no high, no low, no great, no small. He, God, fills, but he bounds, connects, and equals all. Again, this idea of God running through all things, being in vile man as well as in the angels, the rapt seraph, being as God being present in, and therefore each thing being perfect, even just a hair. The hair is just as imperfect as the heart. Right? All nature is but art unknown to thee. Right? It is art, it's designed, it's orderly, it's perfect, it's beautiful, just like we saw in Copernicus and Bruno, but unknown to thee, bringing that idea of the consequence of the infinity of that universe. All is chance, direction which thou canst not see. All discord, harmony, let me show you what he's doing here. All nature is but art unknown to thee. All chance is really direction. So what appears to be chance is really direction. It's been directed by God. It's direction which you cannot see. Because you cannot see the direction, you think it's chance. All is discord, all things that look disorderly to you, are really harmony not understood. Because you don't understand the harmony, you think it's discord. So all chance, direction which thou cannot see. All discord is, you got to insert the is, harmony not understood. All partial evil, all things that look evil to you, are really universal good. Right? So again, chance, disorder, discord, evil, they're only apparent. And once you study man and realize that it's man's own pride and other things within man that lead him to see the universe around him as governed by chance, discord, and evil, then you realize that we can admit for once that if there is a God, and if God is great and perfect and all-powerful, then what seems to be chance to us must be direction. What seems like disorder to us must be harmony, and what looks like evil must be good. And spite of pride and erring reason spite, one truth is clear. Whatever God created, is right. Okay, and I'm going to quickly take you through the rest of the epistles. So that was just man in the abstract. Epistle 2 here is of the nature of and state of man. Again, this is the condition of man, not the state as you and I would think of it. Of the nature and condition of man with respect to himself as an individual. The business of man is not to pry into God, but to study himself. His middle nature, that we're in the middle of this chain. The limits, we're therefore limited in our capacity. Two principles of man are self-love and reason. He thinks both are necessary. Just as all things in the universe contribute to the universe, so all the things in man, even if they seem negative, like self-love or selfishness, are just as necessary as the things that look good, like reason. So both necessary. Self-love, the stronger, and why? Their end the same, meaning they both have the same purpose. Self-love and reason together both have the same purpose, although they seem different. The passions and their use. Now, think in the medieval period, the idea that self-love, passions, the body, all those things, those are all negative things associated with vice. And here Bruno is saying, Alexander Pope is saying in a way that Bruno would have also said, that all things contribute to the great good whole that is creation, right? And so the passions too must have their purpose. If they seem negative to us, then it must be because we don't properly understand them. So we need to try to properly understand their necessity, right? Its necessity of a predominant passion. He thinks that each person has a certain ruling passion within them. Its necessity in directing men to different purposes. His main idea that passions, what's good about passions is that they drive us to do things. They give us a kind of an engine, a motor that propels us forward, right? Desires, self-love. Reason doesn't propel us. It helps us to direct and tame that propulsion we get from passions. So both have their purpose. Reason alone cannot propel us. Just thinking, contemplating cannot move us to do things. But passions are blind, right? And they need direction. its proper use in fixing our principle and ascertaining our virtue. Virtue and vice joined in our mixed nature. The limits near, yet the things separate and evident. What is the office or use of reason? Its true purpose. How odious vice in itself, and how we deceive ourselves into it. What, however, the ends of providence and general good are, answered in our passions and imperfections. How useful these are distributed to all orders of men. How they are useful to society. How passions and imperfections are useful even for society and to the individuals in every state and in every age of life. We'll only look at the first part here of this epistle. It says, know then thyself, right? Know yourself. Presume not God to scan. The proper study of mankind is man. This is one of the most famous lines in all of modern poetry. The proper study of mankind is man, and that kind of is the whole key idea we saw in Bruno and others, here set into a very nice poetic form. Placed on this isthmus of a middle state, a being darkly wise and rudely great, with too much knowledge for the skeptic's side, with too much weakness for the stoic's pride, he hangs between, in doubt to act or rest, and doubt to deem himself a god or a beast, and doubt his mind or body to prefer, born but to die, and reasoning but to err. Alike in ignorance his reason such, whatever he thinks too little or too much, chaos of thought and passion all confused, still by himself abused or disabused, created half to rise and half to fall, great Lord of all things, yet prey to all, sole judge of truth in endless error hurled, the glory, jest, and riddle of the world. So you can see here the predominant idea throughout all of this is this kind of man is between. Man is not at the top or at the bottom. He's between always. This leaves him in doubt. He has too much knowledge to be a skeptic, but too much weakness to believe in himself, right? He's always in doubt. He doesn't believe himself a god, nor is he a beast. And this leads to his confusion. He is, in a way, the glory, but also the jest, the riddle of the world, right? And now he's going to enter in this particular epistle into man himself, this riddle, and try to separate out what is good and what is bad. And it turns out all is good, but only in its proper use. All things that seem bad, like passions, have their proper use. So here he says, two principles in human nature reign, self-love to urge and reason to restrain, right? Self-love propels us, reason restrains us and directs us. Nor is this good, this being the first, nor is self-love good, nor that bad we call. Each works its end. So each has its role, to move or govern all, and to their proper operation still ascribe all good, to their improper ill. So they all both have a role to play. What we call improper and ill is only the misuse of them, not them themselves. Self-love, the spring of action, acts the soul. Reasons, comparing balance, rules the whole. Man for that no action could attend, so without that, which is referring to self-love, he couldn't do anything. Could no action attend. But for this is referring to reason, were active to no end. So if he didn't have reason, his action would be towards no purpose or goal, because it wouldn't be directed. Fixed like a plant on its peculiar spot to draw nutrition, propagate, and rot. Or meteor-like flame lawless through the void, destroying others by himself destroyed. Modes of self-love, the passions we call, 'tis real good or seeming moves them all. But since not every good we can divide, and reason bids us for our own pride, passions, though selfish, if their means be fair, list under reason, come under reason and deserve her care. Those that imparted court a nobler aim, exalt their kind and take some virtue's name. So passions, which were traditionally thought of as the opposite of virtue, right? Bodily passions, says if passions are properly used and directed by reason, then they become virtues. That's what a virtue really is. It's a passion properly used. you can read through these parts. I'm not going to go through all of it. Third epistle of the nature and state of man with respect to society. I'm only going to read some small parts here. So first it was man in the abstract, then man himself, and then third is man in society. So now Pope is extending the kind of lessons of Bruno's worldview and of his own elaboration of it to things that we haven't extended it to at all before, which is political theory. We're going to see that later in this course when these kinds of ideas have their impact on Hobbes and Locke and Rousseau. Right? So this is about governments. So it says, look around our world, behold the chain of love, that great chain of being, combining all below and all below. See plastic nature working to one end, the single atoms to each other tend, attracted to, the next in place formed and impelled its neighbor to embrace. See matter next with various life endued, pressed to one center still, the general good. See dying vegetables life sustain, see life dissolving vegetate again. All forms that perish, other forms supply. By turns we catch the vital breath and die. Like bubbles on the sea of matter born, they rise, they break, and to that sea return. Nothing is foreign, parts relate to whole. One all-extending, all-pervading soul connects each being greatest with the least, made beast innate of beast and man of beast. Beast innate of man and man of beast. All served, all serving, nothing stands alone. The chain holds on, and where it ends unknown. So you see what he's doing here. He's taking that great chain of being and saying, look, if you look at it, everything is related to everything else in the universe. Everything serves everything else. When things die, they see dying vegetables sustain life. We eat things and they sustain us. We kill, and in killing we gain life. And when we die, we feed other things. Everything feeds into everything else and depends on everything else. Everything is interdependent. He's going to use this idea, the universe is an interdependent system, to then bring the idea that man is interdependent with man himself, and that this is what governments are. Society is nothing but the great chain of being, seen in the relations between individual human beings and all other human beings in society. And that's the point of view from which he sees government. Government is no longer this thing ruled by kings or kings put in their place by gods. Kings and governments are really just the proper relationship in the universe of man to man, right? And the proper governments are the ones that properly function the way they ought to function and kind of mimic the order and structure of the universe itself, instead of being one that's imposed on societies by a king or from outside. So you can see that here. Nor think in nature's state they blindly trod. The state of nature was the reign of God. Self-love and social at her birth began, and union, the bond of all things and of man. Right? So self-love, actually, and social love brought human beings together into this organized system that we call society, right? And that's where, when societies began, that was when God reigned among men and brought them into unity with each other. Now I'm going to skip most of this poem. End here. He says, for forms of government, let fools contest. So whoever wants to argue about what the best government is, let them go ahead. Because in truth, whatever is best administered is best. So whatever government makes men happy and makes the world organized and beautiful like the universe, that's the right government. Not whatever theory people have. It's whatever has the best effect. For modes of faith, let graceless zealots fight. He can't be wrong whose life is in the right. Again, the same idea. Whatever works best is the best. Whosever life is proper and just has to be in the right, no matter what priests or the church say, right? In faith and hope the world will disagree, but all man's concern is charity, right? Helping each other, respecting each other, supporting each other. All must be false that thwart this one great end, and all of God that bless mankind or mend. Man, like the generous vine supported lives, the strength he gains is from the embrace he gives. Interdependence, we gain strength by helping others. On their own axis as the planets run, yet make at once their circle around the sun, so two consistent motions act the soul. The one regards itself, and one the whole, the self-love and reason. And thus God and nature linked the general frame and bade self-love and social be the same. I'll allow you to read through the fourth epistle yourself, or at least the argument of it. It then extends, so first it was man in the abstract, then man himself and his proper internal parts were discussed in this poem. And then in the third epistle, it was the social state and government. And then in this fourth, man's destiny, as it were, with respect to his happiness and how happiness is gained in this universe of ours properly. Okay, hope you enjoyed. See you in class next week.